Hey, everybody, welcome to the People, Purpose, and Profits Business Coaching Podcast. I'm Brian, and my wonderful co-host is...
And I'm Kat.
And we are excited today to reach out to our small businesses, medium-sized business, solopreneurs, consultants, to talk about coaching. So often, I had a conversation recently, is what really made me want to bring this topic up. I was speaking to an executive. I do a lot of work with leaders and leadership and teams, helping put more money in their pockets, either through growing their business or removing unneeded expenses. And one of the key things for a lot of leaders is the leaders are often the greatest thing that's holding their organization back. Leaders will often engage me in a consulting role to say, go fix my team. And there's a lot of things that I can do, but will only go so far as the leader. And I was bringing up ways to help the leadership team, just reducing stress, looking at communication, expectation settings, and agreements. And this leader said, we want to be really careful when we talk about coaching, because we don't want people to think they need coaching. And what I got from that was they saw coaching as like a remedial or a punishing thing or a judgment thing. And it's so different from the clients that I personally seek out. I look for people who have already accomplished big, who are doing well, who say, I want to go to the next level. They're more about going towards something than trying to fix a lack. And I just thought that was a fascinating perspective. And curious, Kat, on, have you heard that before? And how did you help people really see coaching is about next level things than like filling in gaps?
Well, the way I look at coaching, I really truly believe that it's about empowerment. And
Mm-hmm.
anybody that looks at it any other way is definitely, seeing lack or seeing limitation, to where I think coaching is about possibilities, about,
Yeah.
what we're truly capable of. And it's so interesting that you talked about that, because I was working with the business just not too long ago, and it's a fairly well off business, but they hit limit, because their leaders don't feel empowered, and they're trying to brush off their work onto others. So it's a lot of strain, and the relationships really do suffer, and nobody is doing their job. Nobody really knows what their job is. So it's a lot of stepping on their toes and pointing fingers. So when
Right.
you start coaching, and then you look at people and their role in the company, and then you bring in order, and then you also address the problems that bleed from the top down, then you have a different perspective, and then you start seeing huge transformations in a very, very short time.
Yeah. You just make me think all the work I do with leaders and teams and just bringing up elephants in the room respectfully. And it's almost like you can get a sigh of relief of, we're finally talking about this.
Right.
And we're talking about it in a constructive way instead of uh, building up alliances, us versus them, but no one's going to say it out loud way. And all that does, especially as a leadership team. I remember when I was in a toxic workplace, our team, once our team turned toxic, someone was talking about our executives, and I said, well, and our executives having a hard time being aligned. And I said, well, if we're having problems at our team level, chances are it's also happening at the executive level as well. So it all comes down to, how well do we communicate, and how well are we listening and understanding? And to me, I think that's where a coach and some of the work that I've done has really helped us kind of pop those bubbles, help people get to that next level, because nobody wants to stay there. Nobody wants to stay in strife. Oftentimes we get comfortable with it, or we think this is how it's always been, but it's only because we haven't experienced how to get out of it yet. And that's where a coach can really help.
And you know what this reminds me of is that conversation that we had a while back with Brian,
Hmm.
when we talked about, taking ownership, like doing your job, like the whole company depends on that, and taking pride in what you do. Because unfortunately, the culture that we've created is all about, doing the bare minimum and going home and not really advancing. And if we start from the top and we learn the proper communication, we look at the things that are getting in the way and we address them, then, I think everybody is going to feel more empowered, and ultimately the results of the company will, show that. And I really would love for you to bring up the metaphor of the Rubik's cube, because I thought that was such a genius way of looking at the layers of a company, or even a goal. If you think about it, I think it can be used in any aspect of our lives. So I would really love for you to elaborate on that, if you would, please.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So this Christmas, I got a Bluetooth Rubik's Cubes, and it hooks you up to your phone, and it actually teaches you how to do it. And it's been a lot of fun. And so far, I can do about 80% of it by memory without needing to use the app anymore. But what's really cool about it is it makes me think, one, how many years have I just been playing with one and never making much progress? Like I think the most I ever got right, yeah, like you. And I think at most I've ever gotten is maybe two sides, but I'm surprised when I get two sides. I'm like, oh, look what happened. I wasn't doing it by purpose. I've also have done YouTube. I'm like, okay, this has got to be free out here. How do I find? So I find like different YouTube and different documents, but none of them made sense. They never helped me. And that's where like I think about this app that I got is kind of like getting a coach. Like, okay, let me actually show you how to do it with someone who's looking at what I'm doing, because it can see the position and then tell me, oh, you got to go backwards and here's why. So that's kind of what made us think about let's do this, because the power of having someone who walks you through is huge. Now, to take the metaphor further, the way that you solve a cube, a pretty common way of teaching, it's by layers. So you first start with getting the white face on the bottom, and you have to make sure that when you do the bottom face, that all of the other colors match. So the first layer. So when you have the bottom face, then you've got a blue line, a red line, green line, and such. So that's the first layer. Then you have a whole bunch of different moves to do the second layer or the middle layer. And there is a sequence and there's things that you look for. Then you have to solve the top face, which is the yellow. That is another group of moves. Then you have to do the top layer, which is be the top line. And that's another group. That's the one that I still need to memorize. I can memorize all the way up through the yellow, and now I have to figure out how to do this one by heart without looking at my cheat sheet. But when I think about this in terms of success and what do we do, so often we're trying to think about all six sides, and we can't get all six sides. We don't have very good coaching. Or even if I coached you all at once and said, here's how to do all six sides, you'd go, oh, okay, that's a little much. What was the first part? What was the middle part? But if you just focus layer by layer, you just focus on that bottom white side with the first layer of the blue, the red, and the yellow stripes, you get good at that. It's one of those things too, is real successful people continue to practice. They get good at that first part. Like I can do that part now in my sleep because I've done it so many times. And then once I got that, then it's like, okay, how do I master the middle layer? And so I tried, I learned, I got all cattywampus, and then and once again, I failed a few times. Like, oh, because that's why I moved it this way, or I twisted the cube that way, because it's a new skill. The whole algorithms, as I said, it's different for the middle layer. It made me change that up. And then getting the yellow top, that had all sorts of different moves as well. And the minute you start going for the yellow and you get those wrong, if you get the wrong turn, your second layer, your bottom layer, they all go to heck. They're gone. So once again, you can either throw the cube and say, I'm done, forget it. Or you go, okay, how do I go backwards? Or how do I, this is probably why I got really good at the first and second layer, because when I did the yellow, I kept messing it all up. So I had to start over again. But all that's doing is just giving me more practice for the first and second layers as I figure out what's stopping me at the yellow. So high level, I just thought about that just as a metaphor for business. You know, do we take on too much where it's overwhelming? Do we even understand what the first layer is? I'm working with a group who wants to do some improvement, and they've got a lot of opportunities. So we're having discussions on what's the first thing, what's going to give us a result that the organization will notice, and two, what's going to begin to really engage the team. So that's the first layer. There's cool stuff we can actually do at second layer, third layer. But I think having that strategic insight to know what that is, whether it's in your business or your life, if you want to lose weight, what's the first layer? Maybe the first layer is get rid of the bad food in your house. Second layer is I'm going to eat well a couple days a week. Second layer might be I'm going to add exercise, and then see how it all ties together. So what do you think of that metaphor? What are your reactions to that?
No, when you brought it up, I thought, it's genius, because I noticed this, especially with coaches. We hear this idea of owning a business and having success, and we kind of know what we're good at. But then when you get into the trenches and when you get into the work of actually building the business and doing the work, there's so much trauma that shows up, and the mind is so busy over amplifying our fears. And this goes without saying, every single time. There hasn't been a coach yet that I've worked with that has not had their fear get in the way. And it's so interesting, especially the last few months I've worked with a lot of coaches that are building more on the group and the membership side. So it's really interesting, because when people want to work with the group, there's so much that happens. So how do I look? Why do I look this way? All that chatter gets in the way. But ultimately, when you start digging and you start looking at what's happening, one of the layers that I notice comes up every single time that gets in the way is past trauma. So even though you have good intentions, you have the skill, if you don't understand what's holding you back, and if you're not guided to change your perspective, to take baby steps, like you said, you have to find the right strategy in order to get to the place where you can get in front of a crowd and say what you have to say and do it in a very professional way. Then you're going to keep going in this loop that keeps you stuck and keeps you from making the impact that you want. So I think it's extremely powerful to have someone that can guide you to better understand yourself, to better understand what your blocks are, to better to form better habits. There's just so much that goes into it, and we are taught that it's, if you ask for help, then you're weak, then you have a problem. Right. So I think when people come and find the space of being themselves and opening up without judgment, I mean, within 3 months, I've seen people that have struggled, and I've worked with people that have struggled for decades. And within 3 months, their business was, where they've always wanted it to be. And it continues to grow. And that's the beauty of it. And once they step into it, it's just like, why was I so fearful of it? And I want people to hear this, because that seems to be a common thread, is when you're in the thought before you get to do it, it's much more scary than when you're there in the midst of doing it.
Right. No, that's so true. A couple of things you make me think of is Brene Brown and talking about the vulnerability hangover, that if you share and you don't feel like you've got like a little hangover the next day of what did I just do, you're not sharing enough. And that through vulnerability is power. And it's so interesting that the thing that we want to avoid most is vulnerability, which also gives us most of what we want. Something I've been reflecting on in my own journey, and this went all the way back to high school. Like a theme in my life has been helping great people do even better than they ever have before. That's kind of the theme in my life, and it used to be in theater. And I remember when I was directing theater, I would go into other peers that were directing, and I would come in and I'd give some notes and thoughts on here's how you can build even better on what you're trying to do. Here's where you think could be even better. And a woman that I knew at the time said, Brian, you do realize you intimidate people when you show up. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I am by far the least intimidating person. Like my heart is there to serve, my heart's to make it better. But I really realized in the last few years how often I muted myself to not intimidate people. But when I muted myself, I wasn't giving my all. I wasn't giving them the ability to hear, like when I'm giving this, there's another quote, I can't remember who said it, is the truth hurts. If it doesn't hurt, it might not be the truth that people are telling you. And I obviously, I'm not direct and a jerk about it, but I definitely, when I work with my clients, I say, what is the best way for you to receive feedback that might be difficult for you to hear? Because that's how I'm going to serve you, especially with high performers who many people never give them feedback because they're intimidated by high performers, or they think I'm not as good as high performers. So who am I to give? I give feedback because people want that to get better. So so that's what you were saying. High level is how often do we have these things that stick with us? I never was able to point that out as a block, as we would say as coaches, but it absolutely blocked.
And I really loved what you shared because there's a couple of very important components in the stories that you told. And one of them is, the perception from the outside is not the perception from the inside, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
And I want people to recognize the fact that you don't have to mute yourself to make others happy. There's something that they have to work on, because if you change yourself in order to make others happy, you're doing a disservice to them and to yourself. And it can be quite damaging, especially in the long run. I've learned that more on the personal level. And I see that, especially with people that want to please. And as coaches, we kind of have that tendency of like wanting to make people happy without stepping on their toes. But it's important, like you said, to tell the truth and to stand your ground and to point out the things that people don't want to look at, because sometimes that's exactly where the breakthrough needs to happen.
Yeah, no, that's very much where the breakthrough needs to happen.
Yep.
So it's almost, once again, wow, didn't mean this to go full circle, but it goes into, the work that I do with teams and naming elephants in the room. Where's the elephants in your heart that
Right.
are there, but you're not talking about them? Let's be brave and let's go after it. Because one of the things that I love in coaching is once you overcome a problem, you never have to deal with it again. Usually, I guess there's sometimes, but that means you haven't really overcome them if you have things that show up over and over again, which also reminds me what I was going to say with your story. Are you a fan of Marissa Peer?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Have you ever heard her talking about we need to make the unfamiliar familiar?
I've heard the term from several others, such
Okay.
as Dr. Joe Dispenza. Yeah.
Yeah, just this whole concept that, we always go towards the familiar. We return to the familiar, and we often hate the unfamiliar. So if we're doing something new, and I think about this, just even my growth as an entrepreneur, There's times it's a pain in the butt when you're in the growth zone. It's like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm slower than normal. This is hard. That's unfamiliar. That's the only reason why it doesn't feel as good as the familiar. And yeah, persistence is huge, but if one of the things she talks about is, I love what I'm learning. I love making this progress. I love figuring this out. Like, even just what we say about the unfamiliar programs our brains to see that as the familiar. And so,
and honestly, I think all business owners and entrepreneurs, I think I always say that entrepreneurs are not a glutton for punishment, but they want always to have that excitement. That's something new. They crave it in a sense, but on the other side is that whole like, I don't want it. I don't want it. So there's two paradigms that clash.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to do a future episode on that because that's actually another thing that I specialize in. And that is, high performers are usually amazing problem solvers. The dark side of that is they create problems so they have something to solve. And those problems usually aren't about growing their business. It shows up in other things.
Yep.
So that's a future one. So tune in when we do it.
So make sure you show up because we have a lot to share. And, I really would love to wrap this up with a bit of what is your best advice for owners, for business owners for 2021? What would you like to, at least one piece of advice that can take them? What is something maybe that you've noticed as a common pattern for business owners?
There's so much, but I think the thing that comes to mind is, if there's a dream you're going after that you can do by yourself, is you're not dreaming big enough.
Absolutely.
And I just want to challenge people to go beyond what's probable and get into the realm of possibility, because you are far more capable of taking your business, your life, to levels that aren't even realistic in your mind right now.
Absolutely.
How
I
about
was
you?
there. I think the one of the best advices that I think I can ever give people is believe in what you have to offer. Without it, there's no going anywhere. You're always going to be, just like a hamster on a wheel running around and never getting anywhere. As soon as you believe in yourself and what you have to offer, you're stepping off that and you're getting out into the world of possibilities, like you said.
Good. I want to add one other thing because you made me think of that. And that is, it's another piece of work that I do and I have a lot of passion behind. And that is, does your business fulfill the life you're designing? Because if there's a mismatch, even though you might believe and love your business, if it's interfering with what you're trying to do in your life, there's going to be something to figure out there.
Absolutely.
So
This is why coaching is really important. It helps you
right.
discover where, you may be going in the wrong directions or where you may be having, internal conflicts.
Right. And once again, as we going back to the whole point about what is coaching, none of this is, coaching, we always help solve a problem, but it doesn't mean you're a problem. And the problems are often defined on, where do you want to go? Where are you heading? How can you go even further? So, well, this has been a really fun discussion. We hope to interact with our audience on this discussion. So join our Facebook group. You're going to interact with the Cat and I. You can also see our Facebook page just to know when new episodes are coming, or subscribe to our YouTube channel or any one of your podcatchers of choice to listen to the audio show. We look forward to continuing to serve you and give you a piece of information that's going to help make a greater impact in your life. Thank you, everybody.
See you soon.